Come on up, guys. So, yeah, I know, sorry. I should have had you closer to the stage.
It's Saturday.
Hey, wait, are we in the right order? That's important.
Yeah.
We are? Okay, cool. We're talking about failing forward, accidental successes. We might have to define that first. But before we do that, please tell us who you are, where you work, what you do.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. Jared Prete. I'm with SYZYGY Group, which is part of WPP. And I personally lead the accounts for Avis, Keen, and Chrome. So 1 in travel and 2 in retail, all 3 in e-commerce, nice. Direct acquisition.
Okay.
I'm Tatiana Kudla with LegalZoom. I'm the director for digital marketing at LegalZoom, and my team covers paid search, paid social, and all display.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for being here, guys. So failing forward, is that a thing? I mean, do we have it wrong by calling it failing forward? I think we're talking about testing and learning mostly, right? I don't know. What does that mean in paid search and SEO?
Yeah, I think it's kind of an evolution, right? So I think when it comes to failing forward, it's for me it's about your perception of failure and how you respond to that. So I think if you have the perception of we're going in to test and learn, we try not to obviously lead with, oh, we're going to fail, and learn with this. We're thinking, this is a kind of an R&D project, so we're going to do our homework. We're going to come to market with a robust methodology and plan, and from there, it's about observing the results, making sure you're measuring and have as controlled an environment as possible. And then, obviously, when you get those results, hopefully they're positive, but if they don't shake out, that's how you respond to them, and you should treat that, if it does, quote unquote, fail, then, there's probably loads of learnings that you could get out of that.
Right.
Yeah, I second that. And we actually try to avoid the term failing in our team, because every test that we do is essentially a test to show, should we move forward with this initiative, yes or no, and it answers a question that we have, or it solves a problem potentially that we have. So for us, testing is not about, do we fail? Does a test fail? It just doesn't gel with us, that language. So we call it, does a test teach us something? Do we learn something? Does a test answer the question that we have, that we set it together? So the term failing to me is always a little, no, I'm not using that one.
Yeah, I don't know. Failing forward is like a Americanization in some ways of, I don't know, just stumbling upon some kind of success by accident, I guess. So tell us a story. Tell us a story about, failing forward in the sense that, you stumbled upon a success by accident almost, and, you learned something that you didn't maybe expect to learn. Do either of you have a good one for me? I think you do.
I try. So we test constantly in my team last year. So we document every single test, and my team alone tests like bidding strategies, landing pages, etc. But just from a bidding strategies and platform perspective, not including the landing page tests, we did 26 tests last year that we documented. To me, that's more than 2 a month. That's a lot, actually, considering we have 3 people doing this. So when we do bigger tests, we actually get obviously our analytics team involved. We have an optimization team that gets involved. And we recently run a test where we wanted to figure out how to get people to a checkout faster. Sure, that's a lot of you that can kind of get on board with that idea. So what we did is for our estate planning product, we decided to shorten the length from the landing page all the way to checkout. Now, with our products, we need to qualify that our customers are actually purchasing the right products, so we ask a lot of questions. So what we did for this test, we reduced the number of questions on the pages, and also we changed some of the wording kind of by accident. We didn't really pay attention to that. For us, it was, okay, now our funnel has gone from X amount of questions to just a few. And then the result was our conversion rate just tanked. And we were like, well, what's happening? It's like, it's so much faster. You should all buy more. So we figured out what was wrong with the test. And we're like, okay, we'll fix that. But then we looked deeper into the data and what we know from our previous experience, a lot of people like drop off at each individual question. So it's kind of a waterfall, you know. So by the time they check out, every question like loses people. Now with our new flow, we saw that people didn't drop off. They actually went through the whole experience. They went through every question. They just dropped off at the checkout page. And we were like, interesting. Let's look at the questions. What's different? And then we actually went into detail to look at what questions did we ask? Did we change the topic? What did we do different? And there was one question in particular that we looked at because we expected a huge drop-off. We talk about death. So this is estate planning, your last will, your testament, living trust kind of documents. And we talked about death. We usually never talk about death. It's so negative, and we don't want to remind people that it's inevitable. But we had a question in there. That question kind of slipped in. And then we looked at it, and we were like, no one dropped off that page. We're like, well, people are okay with it. People are actually okay with answering a question about death. And that was very revealing for us. It's something we, as a company, we shy away from. We want to totally avoid talking about the inevitable. And we were like, no, people are okay. Let's use that learning. So now we are looking at obviously changing the whole experience again, since the overall experience wasn't successful. But we know now we can talk about death, and we can take that subject, maybe talk about it differently, take it to a different level. So that was a really interesting learning that we had.
Yeah, I mean, death is kind of a negative keyword, right?
It is, yeah.
Bad joke. Anyway, no, that's a cool story. Jared, do you have a similar? Well, maybe not about death, but something else.
Nothing about death, but I think in general, in what we do in digital, there's a lot of accidental success, a lot of trial and error, failing forward, however you want to, you perceive it. Especially, and then I think that's very true with paid search. I mean, you kind of almost start, if you think about starting a campaign, and you're building it out, and you're putting some broad match keywords in, and there's a lot of accidental success that you're going to find therein, right? You're going to find keywords that actually perform really well, and those that you want to negate. And then even ad copy, I mean, you're finding accidental successes where certain ad copy might, your hypothesis is, oh, this new ad copy with a stronger promotion is going to way outperform our BAU or, our baseline ad copy. And, that may hold true for a certain set of keywords or a certain specific audience, but then you find that, actually it didn't work at all for this subset. So there's a lot of accidental success, trial and error that you find. I think one story that we found, which was at scale for our car rental client Avis, who was here, the big thing, or one of the bigger focuses for Avis is, when it comes to search, is their branded terms. So we often lead with our planning around branded search and how much we're going to invest in that, and throughout the years, and accounting for seasonality and travel. But also, why that's so important is that Avis and a lot of travel, or all car rental suppliers, allow OTAs like Expedia, Priceline to bid on their brand terms. And so that auction is inherently competitive. And so we've done a lot of testing just to prove out if we're not in that top position, or if we're not even in the auction itself, we actually turned off branded search and tested, and it was a very controlled, robust test environment. We proved out that it was highly incremental for them to be there, and it was more profitable. So with that knowledge, then we went to, okay, well, let's really ensure that we are top position across all brand terms, and how do we approach that? And so we decided to test a bid to position rule, so bid to position 1. And the reason we tested that is because during certain times of the year, especially peak and summer, OTAs will bid more aggressively, and we'll notice our average position drop from 1.1, 1.2 to 1.5, 1.6. So, you know, we wanted to maintain that top position. We know it's incremental. We know it's more profitable to be there. So we put that bid rule in place, and, you know, we did it as a test, and we thought for sure, you know, our hypothesis was we're going to get more volume of clicks. We're going to get, you know, our CPA is going to, you know, either remain the same or improve. And the opposite happened. You know, our CPCs spiked 30% within 2 weeks. Our CPAs, you know, spiked not as high as that, but it was by all accounts a failed test. But when we looked at the data closer, we saw that, you know, actually, well, there were a subset of campaigns and keywords that were driving more incremental, you know, traffic, but it was fairly negligible. And the big cause of the spike in CPCs were due to, we found that specifically there were areas that within our campaigns, either long tail location keywords or certain broad match modifiers that were pulling in keywords that were less relevant. Our quality score wasn't as great. And it was essentially a stress test for all our brand campaigns that we found there's specific locations we were not as strong in terms of price. So that, you know, where OTAs knew they were stronger and had certain bid position rules that were going against our bid position rules, just spiked CPCs, and our CPA also spiked. So what we learned from that was that there were specific locations that the business was just not as strong, didn't have as strong a price. We took that information to the pricing team at Avis, worked with them to you know, get an offer code or discount for those specific locations. And yeah, I mean, we were able to relook at that bid to position rule, turn it off for those locations, and then start testing in those specific geos to ensure that we're normalizing the CPCs and we're getting CPA back on track, and it worked out great.
Nice. So, and Alex had talked about, well, there was, you know, corporate customers versus just leisure customers. Was this for both cases, or?
Yeah. So, it was for both cases, but we often suppress more of our generic strategy and retargeting strategy. We suppress corporate and really approach leisure in that sense. When it comes to brand, we will suppress from an RLSA standpoint on corporate, and then, you know, conversely, more aggressively go after somebody who's identified as leisure. But yeah, I mean, this test was more, you know, I think holistically, we really approached branded search as maintaining top position for both corporate and leisure at their first touch point if they're searching for brands. Once they come in and we could identify them as corporate or leisure, then we would suppress corporate and more aggressively go after leisure. Yeah.
Great. And Tatiana, to go back to your story, you know, you're selling a kind of big ticket items, right? As they say. I mean, not necessarily, not home appliances, but, you know, something very different, obviously. What's the kind of like journey like for that? How often do you have to touch customers in order to be able to convert kind of in the end?
That's a difficult question. It goes into attribution, and we
it
talked about that a lot yesterday.
I know.
But we do. We do have definitely multiple touch point. We did find though that for me it was surprising, at least, that actually our conversion path is shorter than I expected.
Right.
So I think once people come to us, a lot of them probably have done a lot of research already. So they still come to us for research, so we still see multiple touch points, but the conversion path is actually a lot shorter than you may think. It's days rather than weeks or months.
Right, and did the introduction of, you know, death, you know, shorten the path to conversion for some people?
It didn't. It didn't change any of that. No.
I don't know. I mean, you know, some people have, you know, some people are, you know, really okay about it. You know.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. But I wanted to say something about what Jared just said, because you just gave me a good idea. Because we actually did brand testing as well and tried bid to position one and had kind of a similar learning. Like, hey, all it did was increase our CPC, but we didn't really get any more conversions. So we looked at it. We found a lot of BMM match type issues, so we kind of went away from that. But we didn't look at location and geography, so I'm going to go back into that and look at that data. Perfect. So thank you for that.
All right, good. So I don't know, are there tips and tricks to kind of foster kind of failing forward, if you will, or these accidental success stories? I mean, is there a way to or is it always really just kind of an accident when you're looking at testing and learning?
I don't think it's always an accident, because if you are truly in the mindset of testing, you want to learn, right? Yes, some of the learnings are straightforward. It's kind of, it tells you maybe what you wanted to know. Sometimes it isn't. So when it comes to tips and tricks, I would say there are 3 things that stick out to me. They're kind of away from the actual testing methodology, but more about your frame of mind. So number 1 is leave your bias at the door. So forget about what your preconception is, and just test it. Just let the data speak for itself. So I'll give you a very short example here. We brought up Pinterest just, as a discussion point, and everyone looked at us, Pinterest for LegalZoom? Are you guys kidding us? We're like, okay, we're not going to talk about this loudly anymore. We'll just test quietly. And I can say that out publicly now because it turned out to be successful. But, it was something that people were just not really willing to even consider. So leave your bias at the door. Then the other thing that I think is really important, we actually have a testing budget that I set aside. So I take a little bit of our total budget and then say, this I'll mark up for testing. So it comes out, so it gets separated from our core activities. So it doesn't interfere with our performance. So that what it allows us to do is we can test in a way that we are not impacting performance negatively if the test fails, like conversion rate tanks. You don't really want to do that for your core campaigns. So have a testing budget set aside, figure out a way to do it. There's creative ways to do it. And then the third one, challenge each other. Challenge the test setup within your team or with other people, discuss it. Make sure there are no loopholes or, again, bias in your thinking and your methodology. And then challenge the results as well, because we've had a lot of results that look positive on first glance, but when we looked at other KPIs, we suddenly realized, well, great, conversion rate increased, but now our revenue went down or our net margin went down. So challenge each other. It's my third one on this.
Wondering if we can drill down into the Pinterest example a little bit more. Kind of tell us a little bit more about what was that and how did you even get, well, I guess you were using your testing budget, which you set aside for testing new platforms, and just a little bit more about kind of the who, what, when, where, why, how of that.
Sure. So once a year in March, we have something what we call the National Small Business Month. So what we do is we create a specific experience for that. It's gated content. It's a lead gen program. It's gated content. We ask people to give us an email address. They get a lot of good information about how to start a business, and then they get discount codes, not only from us, but some of our partners. So it's a big program. It's not purely a digital play. We use that in our radio copy, podcast copy as well. We use other ways to bring that to our customers or potential customers. And obviously we use digital media as well, since it's online. And so the notion is of course we run a Facebook campaign. Yeah, we should run a LinkedIn campaign. Our small business customers are on LinkedIn. It's kind of the thinking. And that's it. And we're like, well, let's try Pinterest. There's so many smaller entrepreneurs on Pinterest that it's an interesting group to tap into. Let's just check it out. And so we actually set up those 3 campaigns. We set up Facebook, LinkedIn, and Pinterest. And our success metric was how many people are actually signing up, how many emails are we getting, and at what cost, obviously. And it turned out we got the most emails out of Pinterest by far. They were a fraction of the cost of Facebook, which was the next cheap if you want, but it wasn't cheap. They were a fraction of it. So we got a lot more interest from Pinterest. We got it at a lot cheaper rate. And the way we look at it, as we were trying to figure out, now how do we figure out if they convert? Whole different story, attribution problem again. But we're fixing it next time. But what we found out is that there is a huge interest on Pinterest. So we're looking at it now. This is our top funnel, right? We don't know yet how and when they convert because it's such a new group of users for us. But we're like, well, let's look deeper into it. So now we're going to do better testing in the future with Pinterest. But we just wanted to throw it in the mix, and it was successful, and people were surprised.
Wow, nice. That's a great story. Jared, do you have any other platform kind of stories like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think nothing that, in terms of, well, just in terms of testing and learning, I think what we find is when it's producing content for social channels, certain things stick. Obviously, you come to it with an approach of, audience first, and what do you think is going to resonate and foster engagement in that content. But yeah, I mean, you'll often find learnings that certain content really does stick, and that's usually a surprise moment, aha moment, and from there you could continue to evolve that. But in terms of tips and tricks that, I think Tatiana nailed it. I think one thing I would add to that is really distill what is the purpose of why you're testing. Think about all of the stakeholders who are going to be reviewing the results of that test, because if you're coming to it with the assumption that this is just for the acquisition team, think about the SLT team, whether it's internally for their brand or at an agency, and ensure that you're also asking the questions they might ask about that test. So yes, conversion rate might increase, but as Tatiana was saying, it may be reducing your net profit, or really what is the impact to their bottom line from that test, or how could they scale it? So things like that to just think about when you're approaching.
So from a kind of, I guess in Tatiana's case, an interdepartmental, I don't know what the next word is, but yeah, thanks, John. It's Saturday. No, but I'm just, when you look at these tests, and is everyone always kind of in agreement, or is it, or when different departments kind of look at these things, is it kind of a struggle sometimes to get your point of view across about how you think there's something to learn there that maybe someone else missed? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
For sure, yeah. I think a lot of times, anything we do can just, you come at it with the best intentions, but often it turns out that it just actually spurs more questions and more testing. You kind of can easily go down the rabbit hole of testing. So, I think that happens with a majority of the tests, but at the end of the day, I think you really need to distill why are you testing, and put parameters around that test to say, yes, no, neutral, and if it's neutral, then continue to test and introduce a new challenger. But if it's no, obviously, then just move on, and if you continue on a test, that's fine, but at the end of the day, what is the purpose, and what are you ultimately trying to get at? Because you could continue to keep running those tests, and it can be, it just takes up resources and time and money, yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add, if you have a repeatable methodology in place, which is what we try to do, that helps, right? That helps foster trust in your methodology. It helps foster trust across different departments. And for anything that we consider a bigger learning that's outside just a paid search or paid media kind of world, we want to go back to, let's say, our content team say, hey, let's write about that a little bit more. We actually pull in our analysts a little closer and say, hey, can you please validate that? That's what we see. That's what the data tells us. But hey, you guys, this is your bread and butter. Please help us make sure that we're not doing anything, or that we didn't do anything stupid here. So we have them validated. But I think it comes down to having a robust and repeatable methodology.
Okay. And so Tatiana mentioned her R&D budget for this kind of thing. Jared, obviously you have different clients. Is it on a client-by-client basis that you have a certain amount to spend on kind of R&D, if you will, or?
Yeah. We pretty much go into every year with, okay, this is our full year budget, and then what can we allocate towards testing? We have a good idea on, what new tactic strategies we want to test into. Of course, also new vendors we want to try, but we're always meeting vendors and just understanding different ways that we might be able to ultimately align their tech with and their targeting whatever it is to our full year objectives, and also long view objectives in terms of platforms and tech stacks. So yeah, I think every client's different. You want the clients that are willing to test and not afraid to test, and understand the value of testing. And from there, I think it's just really, you just have to carve out that the amount of resources it's going to take and budget it's going to take.
Okay, so let's see. We talked a little bit about other search platforms that you used, which is great. How about advice for folks out there in the audience that might have a smaller, maybe they're doing it in-house, maybe they have a kind of smaller budget. Are there tips and tricks for kind of fostering this whole idea of failing forward for those folks who might not have like a sizable R&D budget, I guess?
Yeah, I think there's like two big things that I think everyone can do. First of all, as you manage any campaign, I'd say any change you make on your campaign, consider that a test to get started, right? Consider a test, ensure you measure what the outcome is. And that gets you into that habit. That gets you into the habit of finding a methodology that works for you, finding a way to communicate the learnings. And that will allow you later on to maybe go up to your boss and say, hey, we've done all these small tests, and we've actually learned X, Y, Z, and maybe we have been able to increase our conversion rate a little bit. And you can go and say, hey, with all these learnings, if I had a little bit more budget, and it doesn't have to be huge, it can be small, I could actually run another test, and here's what I want to prove. So I would say keep testing and document the small stuff that you do every day. So that's number one. And then number two is you all have partners you work with, right? You work with Google, you work with Bing, Gemini. Also, you might work with an agency, you might work with a bidding platform, you might work with other partners. Ask them for help. Ask them to help you validate a test. So you don't necessarily need budget, but you can go to your partners and say, I would like to test something new, a new bidding form or a new bidding structure, and Google will help you. Google will help you to how to measure it, how to make it successful. So ask for help.
Okay, great. Anything to add, Drew?
Yeah. I mean, that's a great example. Like, treat every change as a test. I think that's a very good start. And like Tatiana, I would reinforce that and say, it starts creating this kind of your own internal methodology of how to test. But yeah, I mean, to add to it, I mean, we approach it with in a pretty formal way at every test we do. So, and it's about consensus building before you actually go and test for us. So, we actually put a brief in place that starts with an executive summary of the context around the test, so that we're telling a story of why we're testing, and that helps frame it and give internal stakeholders, but also client stakeholders, a view of the purpose of the test. And then we clearly outline what are the objectives for that test. We then write out the methodology and go over it multiple times as a team. And from there, we also identify how we are going to measure, what platforms we're going to measure, what are the KPIs, and of course the budget and the brands and the products. And so there's a ton of detail that goes around in this, and we just truly formalize it and put it in a document, and then we collectively sign off and build that consensus with the client internally. So I would say, like, it doesn't have to be that robust of a document if you're starting off in testing, but think about those things so that you're putting you're basically avoiding any bias, you're putting it in the right context, you're putting like kind of I like the effects.
Yeah, right?
Sweet.
Yeah.
Was that a signal? Am I rambling too much? But at the end of the day, it's you really want to just really distill what it is you're going after. Try not to get distracted, and of course, when you look at those results, take the wins with the losses and learn from the losses.
Okay. All right. Well, good. So I think Ryan's standing. That means it's time to cut to audience Q&A. And by the way, with this session, I mean, you guys can tell us a story if you want. I mean, you don't have to necessarily ask a question. We like hearing these kind of stories. So anyone who has anything to ask or offer to the panel. Oh, we got a couple. We got Pearson over here, and then Nicole afterwards. Okay. Great. Go ahead, Pearson. Remind us that you're Pearson, please.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Where you work?
My name's Pearson.
Pearson.
I work at Grubhub.
Right.
My question is around, Tatiana, you talked about how you catalog every test. Can you just describe that process a little more? Are you keeping record of all these tests in an Excel doc? Is it a shared Google doc? How do you catalog all the tests?
So we started last year with a methodology where we have a template that literally starts off with what's a challenge you want to, you have, the problem you want to solve. So essentially asking why you're testing this. Have a hypothesis is the next part. What is the solution you're going to put in place? And then how do you set up the test? So what's the test design? That includes how much budget, what platform, a little bit more details on the test itself, and also what is your success metric, right? What is the one metric that tells you this test was successful or not? So that's how we started last year, and we've evolved a little bit this year, where this year I actually have my team send me all their test proposals first, because what we found last year was there was a few tests that were a little wonky. So we thought we would be testing one metric. It turned out another one turned out to be more important, and we learned as a team that we need to look at that beforehand before we set up a test. So now we have a similar document where everyone has to figure out exactly what they want to do, how they want to test it, and how they measure it. And what that practice has, in my mind at least, has shown us is that we are actually much more I can't say that word right now.
Hey.
You know what I mean. So we're much better this year beforehand to actually understand what we want to test. And then we've changed now our outcome where, hey, we need to share this to a wider audience. So last year, we as a company, we have we use Box, so we have a Box folder for all company tests. Now, nobody ever goes in there and reads any of the tests. So this year we said, well, let's do something different. So we actually write every successful test up as a case study. We put a little picture in there. We make it semi-pretty. We're not designed, so it's not really pretty, but a little prettier. And then we share that across the whole marketing department. Or if it impacts other teams, we share it across there too. So we still, it's still in our Box folder somewhere, so people can still have access to it outside. But we share it much more, and we write it up as a case study because it tells the story a little bit better than just having it as a document sitting somewhere.
Gives it a history too. That's great.
One more over here.
Yeah, Nicole.
I'm Nicole from Kohl's. So our search program is gigantic, and when we test stuff, we have to sell it off to literally the whole company. So the biggest question we get in terms of testing is, well, how long are you going to be testing this for? And we get a lot of pushback when we say, well, it depends how long it takes to reach significance. We're not sure. That's why we're testing.
Stat-sig, right?
Yeah. So how do you guys sell that off? Like, we don't know how long it's gonna take as long as it takes because we don't have a solution.
Yeah. Well, I would say, to your question, does it always have to be at a huge scale, or can it be? Okay.
We don't
Yeah.
have a huge scale.
Okay. Yeah. So then I would. Yeah. I mean, it is a difficult in terms of timing. But usually, what I typically do is work with the team to understand how long that's going to take. If we were to, once we have the kind of framework of a test built, we typically will tackle that question towards the end, because when you have your objectives and you have your methodology of how you want to test, and you know how you're going to measure, then work with the team in terms of implementation and say, if we were to move forward with this exact methodology, how would can we do it with this specific campaigns, and is that going to, based on our existing run rate of impressions or what we expect to get in terms of impressions, you can often back into timing there. But yeah, there's a couple of different ways to approach it, but that's typically how we approach it. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know anything, but if you're not doing it at scale, like, is it easier to kind of sell up?
Yeah, well,
Right? I mean, like,
it's
it's like-
still at scale in terms of stat sig.
Right.
So it's if you can do a phased approach, where there's like for brands, we bucket our brand terms for Avis at least in, we have our core brand terms which are have the which are just your standard kind of Avis rental car. Then we have our location brand terms. We have our airport brand terms. So there's, we would approach it in, different ways, and they're broken out by match type. So we know that if we start with a broad match or phrase, we may get more scale quicker. And for us, it's typically we're at it's a big enough account where we get stat sig fairly quickly. Some of the challenges we face is around seasonality. So as our views are almost always year over year. So but looking back last year, it could be there's always things and nuances and outside factors that could have happened last year. So we really have to document, do a good job of keeping track of, hey, was TV running at this time last year that may have influenced or skewed some of the results or introduced a bias. And yeah, because travel's so seasonal, as we get closer to the summer, our conversion rate inherently increases, right? So when we're doing testing and we're trying to yield, a lower CPA, it's just a heavy consideration, and how we have to look back and how we are going to measure going forward. And so usually for us, it's a combination of KPIs that we look at. But yeah, I would say in terms of like selling the test through, I mean, the good thing about Kohl's is you do have that scale and you should be able to get stat sig fairly quickly. Maybe it's about thinking of which campaigns, maybe start small, or it could be a specific category, or that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, seasonality is like a whole other topic I think we could
Yeah.
maybe do. But I just realized we're like way over, so we actually have to wrap this one. So you guys, thanks very much. I really
Thank
enjoyed this
you.
conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right on, guys.